Don't even get me started on fractions. To multiply them, it's going to take a lot of action. But math can be simple. All it takes is practice. Your brain is like a muscle. Make sure it's active.
Hey guys, let's go over this 4.10 Introduction to Composite Functions. Our lesson goal is students will be able to simplify and graph operations on functions and determine compositions. Normally you think of a musician like Bach who composes music. We're going to compose functions. What's our standard for functions and building functions? Students will find the sum and difference and the product and quotient of functions. Students will compose or create new functions from previous functions.
All right, what are composite functions? You have these abbreviations. You're going to have something that looks like this. Now that looks like the word what? Looks like fog, which we actually had the other day. But it is not fog. It is a function of G. F of G. Say that. Okay, looks kind of weird, right? Math, we like our favorite variable. What's our favorite variable? So, F of G of X. So these are all synonyms. Okay, so when you see fog, you should think F of X, and then you can just put it in this notation. F of G of X. It's kind of like putting your phone inside that controller or the new camera lens. Okay? So if I switch the letters around, if I wrote this, golf, it's playing really well right now. What would I write here? G, and then the word of, F. And how would I write that in function notation? G, parentheses, so now I got G of F of X. Now also note that fog and golf are not equal. So if you switch them around, they're not the same. Alright, so here I'm going to talk about the domain of composite functions. Okay, we just talked about a real life example like, can I put my old Nintendo game into your system, and then can it actually play on the screen? If I take an X value, an input, I'm putting it into the function of G, and I get G of X. And then whatever the answer is, then I put it into the function of F, and I get something called F of G of X. Essentially what's happening is when you say F of G, you're putting it first into the G, and then the F. So let's write that in our notes. I forgot that was a good hint for you guys. Everyone say right to left.
Right to left.
Right to left. So even though in English, I know most of the time in math too, we're going left to right, but you kind of work with the function G first. You see how it's kind of like in the inside? Do you see that? You do that one first, and then you do the F. Okay? Alright, so remember in math, sometimes you can't pick all the numbers, can you? There are some restrictions. So it says X must be in the domain of G. So whatever I pick, right, sometimes it's all real numbers, sometimes it's negative infinity to infinity, but sometimes it's not. But when you have some restrictions, then you have to kind of like put more restrictions in there, in your answer. So it says, and X must be in the domain of F. Okay? And this idea is called the most restrictive domain. Say that, class. Okay? So let's just say that my wife trains my son, right? I think my wife's pretty strict if you met her and you grew up in our household. I think my wife's pretty strict, right? But when my son enters someone else's home, should he forget all the training and all the rules that he's been trained with? No. He's been strict, and then he say goes into your house and you have a bunch of rules, he better follow all of those rules, right? Because really, he's trying to like code what's happening in his environment. He better be picking about the most restrictive domain, the most strict environment. That's how he's going to act. Does that make sense? And so that kind of happens with our domains of our functions. Super conceptual, but basically you find the domain of F, you find the domain of G, and then which one is the most restrictive, that's the one you use. If they're both kind of restrictive, then you kind of combine them, and we see our answer.
I had to divide to get it right. I'm really playing chess. I use my knight, can't fall behind. I got it right, don't sleep in class. Or you won't pass. I use my formula sheet, cause I don't cheat. I use it on my test. I'm feeling blessed, rose for Christ. You gotta come, remember in class, we don't chew gum. Get off your phone and pay attention. Not to mention, you're your detention.